What have the wildfires done to Southern California and the people who live there? And could any of this destruction have been prevented? Just asking questions. I'm Zach Weissmuller, Reason Senior Producer. Liz Wolfe, unfortunately, is out sick today, but I'm wishing her well and to be back in full force soon. The wildfires breaking out across greater Los Angeles have so far killed at least 25 people and damaged or destroyed more than 12,000 structures, according to the LA Times. Today's guest lost her home in these fires. "This is what's left of my house," she wrote on X. "Every house on the block is burned to the ground." Meghan Daum is a writer, author of 5 books, including The Problem with Everything, My Journey Through the New Culture Wars, and The Unspeakable, and Other Subjects of Discussion, which is a Penn Center USA Award winner for creative nonfiction. She also hosts the podcast The Unspeakable with Meghan Daum. Meghan, I want to first say that I'm so sorry for what's happened to your home. I'm glad you were unharmed, and thank you for coming to speak with us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Zach.
So, I guess to start first, just how are you holding up?
I mean, it's surreal. I mean, I should say this is such a cliche, but it's true. I mean, I'm lucky. I'm lucky that I got out. I'm frankly lucky that I'm a single person. I live pretty lightly in the world. I was living in this house with my dog. As I have been clear about, I was renting the house. It was not a
Mhm.
homeowner. The majority of people who've lost their homes were, they were homeowners. No telling what the insurance situation is going to be. So, in a lot of ways, I'm very fortunate. But obviously, I've lost all of my possessions, and it's really it's an unprecedented situation here, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want you put out a little dispatch shortly after the fires broke out. So I know that you were living in Altadena, which is a beautiful suburb of LA. I used to go hiking out there. Just you don't know my background, but I lived in LA for 15 years. Then I moved to Florida. I thought about moving to Altadena for a while there myself. We've got an aerial shot here, John, if you could play that real quick, that was taken by ABC7 helicopter journalist Chris Christie. Um, and people can just see, is that playing? Let's see. Oh, there it is. Okay. You can see the scale of what happened there. It's that just awful, like apocalyptic. Could you just describe Altadena a bit for people who aren't familiar?
Yeah, I mean, as I said in my dispatch, it's kind of an enchanted forest. It's an unincorporated community north of Pasadena. So that means it's about 25 miles inland. So it's I'd say 25 miles or so east of Pacific Palisades, which is obviously where the biggest fire is and where we're seeing a
Yeah.
lot of footage. Um, it is right up against the San Gabriel Mountains. So it has this incredible effect where the mountain is just like right there, like you're in the shadow of this huge mountain range. And I mean, it is a suburb technically, but it also feels sort of semi-rural. It's zoned for equestrian, so people sort of ride their horses around sometimes, and they like keep them in their garage, sort of thing. It's
Yeah.
the houses are close together. We're not talking about some kind of sprawling exurb or anything like that. It feels, the houses they're built around, the early part of the 20th century. They're old houses, they're small houses. It's not a particularly affluent community. Obviously, it's California, so the houses are very valuable and there are some wealthy people. But Altadena, it's being described as a working class community. I don't think that's entirely wrong. It's very racially diverse. It's about 18% Black, 30% Hispanic. It's historically there has been a large Black population there, so it's a really, really unique kind of place.
Yeah. This you mentioned the horseback riding. That was always a surprising thing when driving around us. You just get, barely out of LA, going past Pasadena and you start seeing someone riding down the street on a horse. There's other parts, like Riverside, parts of Riverside where it like seems kind of suburban, but there's horses. That's the strange thing about Southern California is there's like the dense LA city center, and then like some level of density of human activity just it keeps extending outward and outward, but it's very quickly beginning to mingle with nature. And I mean, the way you're describing Altadena, that's just perfect. And that's also why you presume you're so vulnerable to these fires because you're just right up against the wilderness, right?
Right, although I will say where I was living was not a particularly high risk fire area. So,
Huh.
we when we think of wildfires in California that affect homes, we think of people living in canyons, we think of people in these, like, big glass houses hanging off the side of a cliff, and, it's very rare that a fire would jump down from the canyon into a more densely populated area. So, like I said in my piece, I can yes, there are bears wandering around sometimes, and they get into people's trash cans, and they sometimes if, there's a couple swimming pools, and they'll dip into them kinda thing. But you can still walk a half a mile to the Rite Aid. It's very much a suburban kind of town. I mean, there are businesses, there's gas stations and hardware stores, and so to have a fire come down from Eaton Canyon, which is about 4 miles away from my house, into that kind of developed area is unprecedented. So that's why, when I evacuated anyway, I just was seeing it as a precaution. It never once crossed my mind that the house would burn down.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about how the fires unfolded from your perspective, from your point of view, your on the ground perspective?
Yeah. Well, so it was Tuesday the 7th, and, I mean, the Santa Ana winds were really strong, and it's not the typical time of year for Santa Ana winds. They tend to happen in the fall. I mean, they were probably going 50, 60 miles an hour that afternoon. I'm not quite sure. I mean, it was funny. I had posted some videos of my dog. I have a Newfoundland dog, and he's very dramatic hair. And so he had been sitting in the yard with the winds blowing and his hair was blowing around. And as one does, I took some videos and posted on Twitter. And then, a couple hours later, I read about what was going on in Pacific Palisades that had gotten really out of control, and it was a real emergency situation, and I thought, "Oh gosh, that's not good." And then about 6:15 PM, um, well, I heard a helicopter go over, um, in Altadena, and I thought, "Uh-oh, that's not a good sign," because when the winds are blowing to that extent and it was already after dark, there's no reason a helicopter should be up there unless there's a real, real emergency. And then I started to hear about, a fire that had broken out in Eaton Canyon, which, again, it's a wilderness area. People really don't have houses in Eaton Canyon. I mean, they'll have them on the outskirts kinda thing, but it's hiking trails, as you just described. I mean, there's
Okay.
mountain lions and bobcats and that kinda thing. So, yeah, I heard about that, about again, I wasn't getting any alerts on my phone. I wasn't hearing about anything. I think I maybe jumped on a Facebook Altadena group. I'm on a WhatsApp group for people who use the dog park. So I kinda checked in with that, and they were talking about it, but most people were saying, "Well, it's in the canyon, it's not gonna come over here, just sit tight." And, about 45 minutes later, I stepped into my front yard, and I could see the flames from Eaton Canyon Fire, from my front yard. Kind of I just sort of peered through you know, uh, looked through the neighbor's house across the street, kind of through the cracks of the you know, of the other houses. But again, I wasn't getting any alerts. I talked to one of my neighbors, and she said, "Well, this has happened before, let's not, make too much of it." And then another neighbor came by and she said, "Well, it's never happened before, but these winds are really unusual. Maybe just pack a bag, get your stuff in order, just be ready to go. They'll let us know if we need to leave." Um, and at that point, I I just sort of I honestly left about an hour later because I was like, "Well, the power's gonna go out. I don't wanna be, like, worrying about this with the power out." But I really did not take it seriously. I mean, I literally took, like, an extra sweater and some dog food and, like, what was in the refrigerator that I was gonna eat later that night, like, some takeout that
Yeah.
I had in the refrigerator,
Yeah,
and
because
I
the people
yeah.
living in Southern California, this is one, I'm in Florida now, so we kind of are like stupidly brave about hurricanes sometimes where we're like, "Oh, it's just a category 2, category 3," like that, like, I've been through it before. That's kinda like that can be, like, the mentality in Southern California. It's like some level of wildfire happens almost
Yes.
every summer, and it's awful because the smoke makes you stay inside, and since you have to wear a mask and, fire up the, air purifiers inside. But, yeah, I can imagine that, uh, like, I guess that transition from, I'm a Californian, I'm used to this, to, "Oh, this it really is different this time," must have been really jarring.
Yeah, and, I mean, I didn't even even as I was leaving, I thought, "Wow, that's you can really see." And I was, not hightailing it out of there. I was actually, I'm a journalist, so I was kind of winding around the streets, seeing if I could get
Yeah.
a better view of the fire. I was taking some pictures, I was trying to see what was going on. Um, and also, I felt like I almost felt like I was being a drama queen. It's like, well, people are, like, really evacuating in the Palisades, like, that's serious, like, don't make this about you. I kinda had that feeling, like,
Mhm.
just chill, and so I just really grabbed a few things, and I drove to a friend's house about 10 miles away, and even that night, I thought, "Well, I don't hopefully I can go back tomorrow." And it wasn't until the next day that, I was informed that the entire neighborhood was just leveled, just absolutely wiped out.
Jeez. And my understanding is you're, bunker down in, like, Silver Lake now, East LA
Yeah, yes,
area?
Echo
Okay.
Park, Silver
Yeah.
Lake area.
Okay.
Mhm.
And have you or anyone that you know been back to Altadena and kinda seen firsthand
Yeah.
what's there? We saw
Yeah.
the aerial shot, but being on the ground's much different.
Yeah, I actually went up there, day before yesterday. They're not letting people up, but
Yeah.
I was with somebody, we had media passes, so we were able to get up there. The National Guard is up there, Sheriff Department, California Highway Patrol. I mean, it's an investigation scene now. It's crime scene because, there could be human, they're not sure how many, human lives have been lost but, yeah, no, it's really unlike anything you've ever seen. It's just, um occasionally, there's a house standing for no particular reason why. It doesn't make any sense. All the houses are burned down around it, and there will be one house, but for the most part, it's just lot after lot of ash and chimneys. So most of
Mhm.
the houses were older, like I said. They had wood-burning fireplaces, they had chimneys. So you just have this effect where you're driving along, and it's just chimney, 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 chimney.
Ugh. You mentioned, you called it a crime scene. This is one of we're gonna get into sort of the social media speculation aspect of all this in a second, but that's been one of the big controversies is wh- how big a role did arson play in this? I mean, my assumption from the beginning, just knowing that these fires start all the time from downed power lines or campfires that just accidentally ignite something. I figured that's what happened in the Palisades, but then there have been these videos coming out of people that are setting fires. I don't, that I think that some of these people are just opportunists. It does make you take a step back and think like, wow, there really are people out there that like the Joker type personality. They do want to see the world burn. They see the chaos and they're just gonna, add to it. Do you have any inclinations about the role that arson may or may not have played here?
I do not.
No.
With these kinds of things, that's always a factor. So, but you gotta remember there were 8 fires at one point. I mean, Los Angeles County is an enormous area, so you just had these different fires breaking out. The Palisades Fire was the largest, and then the Eaton is the second largest. What we think about the Eaton fire is that, I mean, what is being said is that there was a Southern California gas, some kind of tower or a transponder or something that sparked and set the fire. So now there's a class action lawsuit that I think was,
Mm,
filed on Monday or Tuesday maybe. So that's gonna be a story. In terms of the Palisades fire, I really don't know. I was hearing about things about, like, people, I don't know, campers or hikers or whatever. Um, I there was on I think it was Tuesday night, maybe a fire broke out in, maybe it was Wednesday night actually. Hollywood Hills, suddenly there was a fire, um, in or near Runyon Canyon, which is another big hiking area, um, where, south of the just downhill from the Hollywood sign and the Griffith Observatory. Um, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure that's being attributed to arson, and they
mm,
got that under control a lot, more quickly because it was Wednesday night by then, and the winds were not as strong, so they could actually get aircraft up there. But yeah, I mean, it's a perfect storm, and the fact is that there have never ever been winds like this. There have never
yeah.
been this particular set of conditions with no rain since April, this level of winds, this, level of humidity, lack of humidity, um, and, I suppose it was bound to happen. It's just unfortunate that, um, the infrastructure doesn't seem to have been there as much as it could have been.
Yeah, and the infrastructure question is one that I want to get into in a second. With the possibility that the fire that burned down your home, starting with a utility, this is what happened in Hawaii, and the way that that lawsuit is playing out is basically the insurance companies are suing the Hawaii utility because they're the ones that are having to insure all this. So I'm sure that's going to play a role here. But yeah, there's like this. I think the frustrating thing watching this play out from somebody who lived in California and understands a lot about the dysfunction of California politics is that you know, th everyone wants a villain. There's a lot of different interests who create the sort of, there's the weather conditions you're talking about, which are, dry, just crazy Santa Ana winds in a part of season when they are not usually, but then there's the conditions of, like, getting things, like resilience and being ready to, resilience, protection, and maintenance always seem to be just like not quite there in California. That at least that was my experience as a citizen there. It's been predictably chaotic and politically charged on social media. You mentioned in your dispatch that you were staying off social media for a while. Governor Gavin Newsom posted a clip today of a recent MSNBC appearance where he was venting some of his frustration about what he views as partisan attacks, including by Trump, referring to him as new scum,
Yeah.
which I want to roll that now and ask you a question about the social media aspect of all this. Could you play that, John?
And, I get it. They want to take us. I get it. I'm not naive. I get the California derangement syndrome. I've been living with that for years and years. New scum. The same seventh grade. I remember the guy on Baltimore Avenue that called me new scum. I was in seventh grade. I can handle that. We'll leave that aside. I understand what they're trying to do. I want to work with them. It's not about me. It's about people that we both represent.
Does Newsom's frustration with the outside world's reaction to this event ring true with you at all?
I mean, I feel like the political class is just so separate from the general citizenry at this point, that it doesn't matter. It's sort of just like watching a clown show.
Mm,
Um, I don't it's not surprising. Trump's reaction is not surprising. The governor's reaction is not surprising. It just I just feel like it just really doesn't matter. I mean, this city is so broken. So many of these cities are broken. There's a whole bunch of reasons for it. It's never one thing. Um, I don't I don't really exactly know how to respond to that. I mean,
yeah,
it's frustrating. The mayor's response is frustrating. I don't it's not her fault that it's an 18-hour flight from Ghana. I don't know if she indeed went there after there were warnings that a major event like this might happen. That's not the best judgment. I don't know. I just think that we can't this is going to take years to unpack,
yeah.
and I honestly don't really care. Like, I wanna read the books about this that people, publish 10 years from now and 20 years from now. This is going to be unfolding over 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. It's been
Yeah.
1 week.
Yeah, the problem that I see here is that California has become a political symbol of something which is like the exemplar of a blue state. And so everyone wants to kind of latch onto whatever their particular issue is, whether, you saw a lot of the people talking about DEI, and there was the video of a female firefighter say, it looked like she was saying she was not going to pull a man out of a house.
She
Like, if,
wouldn't be able to lift a man out of a house,
right. She was like,
right,
if you need me to do that, then he's in big
right.
trouble.
My
And like,
it's not my job to educate
yeah,
you or lift you out of a house,
yeah,
yeah.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you. It gives that person a little bit more ease, knowing that somebody might understand their situation better. Is she strong enough to do this? Or you couldn't carry my husband out of a fire, which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire.
and to be clear, that's not good. But I don't think that is really explain much of what went wrong here. And yes, there were also budget cuts. There were some budget cuts to the fire department, but they've got over an $800 million budget. Firefighters have been, heroically out there doing what firefighters do. What frustrates me about it, just knowing a little bit about these issues, is that kind of in the past, when going through wildfires, what we've gotten as a public from people like Gavin Newsom are these lectures about climate change, which I don't doubt play a role in creating these tinderbox conditions, but then seemingly little action to like mitigate the effects of that, to make it less likely that this kind of thing would happen. I mean, one thing that I'm just going to pull up here as an example is prescribed burns, because that seems like the one of the obvious ways to try to make just super fires less likely. What this map shows is that if I can just compare my current home state of Florida to California, that Florida burns over 2 million acres of forestry a year. California does under 200,000 acres a year. And our friends at the Breakthrough Institute, uh, who I've had on the show before, have estimated that their recommendation is essentially that California's got double the forestry of Florida. It's also much drier. That they need to be burning more, like doing prescribed burns, more like 4 million acres a year. And if they did that, the long term they would spend more money, but the savings in avoiding this kind of destruction would be, they estimate, close to 11 billion a year in
Mhm.
cost savings. And yet there's been a lot of talk about this, but an inability to make it happen. Part of that is federal regulations. This chart from PERC shows that, prescribed burns can take up to 7 years to be approved because of a law called NEPA at the federal level. But then California's got its own state level things that gum things up even more. And there were real policy decisions a few years ago to step back from this. This NPR article highlighted that there were more than 40 scientists who sent a letter requesting that the Forest Service reconsider its policy change to slow down prescribed burns. And that one of the fire scientists quoted said the problem is that it's political pressure, not science. And I have to say that political pressure partly came from the governor. This is he basically called the Biden administration and asked them to reconsider their policy, because the fear at the time was that doing the prescribed burns under the dry conditions might get out of control. And yeah, it's a long windup, but I guess it's what I wanted to ask you is like, what are your feelings about the state government right now as a Californian?
Not good. Look, I should say that I have lived in California for the majority of my adult life, probably 25 years total. I've only been back for the last 3 years. I was in New York for about 6 years before that. I'm a bit of a
Hmm.
nomad.
Mhm.
No, it's clearly it's clearly completely chaotic. It's not functional. I mean, California can manage to spend money, more money than anybody else on and do less with it. Uh, in terms of prescribed burns, again, this is not an area of expertise at all, but I can imagine that if you went to the people of Pacific Palisades and say, "Hey, we want to do a prescribed burn in this area in 1 year or 2 years or 4 years," they're going to spend 6 years fighting that. They don't want that. It could get out of control, but it's also going to affect the air quality. It's going to affect traffic. It's going to
Yes.
affect all kinds of things that people who, frankly, have a lot of power and influence don't want to have happen in their backyard. So, these are all things to consider,
Yeah.
and at a certain point, you gotta tell people, "Sorry, too bad, we're doing this." But when you've got properties with this kind of value, the land value is just, I don't think people can quite fathom. I mean, I was reading that the sort of the average home value in Pacific Palisades is over $3 million. It wouldn't surprise me if it was more than that. In Altadena, it's around $1 million. With a lot of those, a lot of people, you know, making far less money that can ever actually most people in Altadena could not afford to buy their homes now. Anyway, my point is that you've just got a whole you've got corridors of influence and power that kind of sneak up on you and certainly have an effect on these kinds of policies in ways that most people just don't understand.
Yeah, it's a good point about the local opposition to things like this. And often this kind of opposition, which ultimately boils down to a kind of inconvenience thing. I don't want my life inconvenienced, and then gets wrapped in a pseudo environmental concern.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
like the Sierra Club is one of the groups that has opposed prescribed burns. They're like, we should not be in any way managing the forest, and in fact, you shouldn't even be living here. And then and we've heard a little bit about the protection of the Delta smelt too, that makes it impossible to build certain water infrastructure. So it's like it's like this intra-environmentalist war between environmentalists who think that this is the part of the environment that needs to be preserved, and others that think this part. And also that is tied up with, where I happen to live along the coast. So I guess, like, do you think any of that there will be any sort of reevaluation, that there will be a shift in mindset? Because that seems like what kind of needs to happen in order for any of these problems to be solved.
I mean, the shift in mindset was already happening. I mean, you had people move to the political right, in pretty significant numbers in this last election. I mean, a lot of counties flipped for Trump in
Mhm.
California. I mean, it's already the response to Trump, is the vibe is completely different than it was in 2016. I mean, some people are just resigned, or they're saying, "I'm not even gonna think about this anymore," and other people are saying, "Well, whatever we've been doing hasn't been working." I mean, you know, I went to, I lost all of my possessions. I went into the CVS, the next day or so in Silver Lake to try to get some toothpaste. I didn't even know what I needed, and I just kinda stumbled in there. Every single thing was locked up. I couldn't even buy anything, and I had to call somebody over to unlock the case, and I was like, "I don't even know what I need." I walked out of the store.
Yeah.
These are the conditions here. It
Yeah.
wasn't working before, and so if
And
it takes
these
something like
sort of
this.
just keep piling up, right?
Yeah.
And at some point you're like, I can't take this
Yeah,
anymore.
no, people, I mean, look, I mean, and this is my whole wheelhouse. I mean, I've built an entire community of, based on people who always identified as on the left, or at least for the most part, and are suddenly feeling really destabilized politically because they're like, "Well, actually, wait, this isn't adding up anymore." And I don't see
Yeah.
myself as somebody on the political right, but, whatever we're doing makes absolutely no sense from any kind of, like, material point of view.
Yeah. Well, so that's like that's one piece of it is the environmentalist and kind of, I guess you could call it NIMBY type mindset. But then another is the approach to that I'll just say economics. And that's where questions like the insurance situation come into play. A huge issue is that State Farm, the largest insurer in the state, dropped 30,000 home policies last year, including 1,600 in the Palisades. And California forcibly, I mean, a big reason for this, the inability of insurance to stay in the state, is that California voters decided back in the late 80s to pass something called Prop 103, and that capped insurance premium hikes at 7% unless the insurer goes to a public hearing to get it approved by the commissioner. And you can kind of imagine how those public hearings might go. Here's some of the recent results that of this policy that I just want everyone to absorb. This shows insurance company non-renewals. That is the red line. You see that spike after 2018 up through 2019. This is a little bit even outdated at this point, but it shows you the trend in recent years. It's only accelerated. The blue line is the increase, which coincides the increase in fair plan policies. And the fair plan is essentially the state's insurance. When you can't get insurance anywhere else, the state's going to underwrite it. And that is what, so now the taxpayer is basically on the hook for anything that happens going
Right.
forward. This is zooming in, showing the same data in northern Los Angeles, and it picture
Yeah.
looks even a little
This
worse.
is this
Yeah.
is how it works for earthquake insurance as well, by the way, the
Mhm.
California FAIR Plan. You have to buy earthquake insurance through the state as well.
Yes, and it's quite expensive.
Yes, it is.
So yeah, I mean, insurers dropping like flies, people fleeing to the state emergency insurance. You mentioned, you're a renter, but those costs are still passed on to you in the form of a rent. You know, what kind of do you think like the economic questions almost seem harder, even harder to shift than
Yeah.
some of these other questions? Like, what are your feelings about the likelihood of that kind of mind shift as
I
well?
mean, well, I think the economic inequality is gonna become even more pronounced. I mean, California is a state where you've got you're a homeowner, or you're sort of out of luck. I mean, the cost of living and the housing affordability is such a monumental crisis at this point, and it has just gotten exponentially worse. I mean, overnight, it got so much worse. Um, and so I don't know. I mean, I'm very interested in housing and the housing market, and I have no idea what's gonna happen. I mean, I fear what might happen and what probably will happen, which is that all of these people who lost their homes, wealthy people, will come in and buy what little is left. I mean, there was already a massive inventory problem because we've got this lock-in effect. This is happening all over the country because of the interest rates, and so most people who own homes have, got a 3% interest rate if they have a mortgage at all. They can't afford to go anywhere. They can't sell their house. You've got baby boomers living in 2,500 square foot houses, retirees that would like to downsize, but they can't. So we've already got this frozen market. And now you've got the wealthiest people in the country who've lost their homes who can come and drop cash easily on what's left. And that is terrible for an economy. It's terrible for a society, for communities, for a city. And I love California. I love Los Angeles. I still love it, actually. And it makes me really, really sad. So we shall see.
Yeah. Did the housing costs, how big a factor did that play in your decision to pick Altadena as a place to rent? I'm just thinking of my own experience when I was looking, and thinking of moving out of the city. That was one place I was looking, and that definitely played a role. It's not cheap by any means, but
Well, it
it's all
was cheap.
relative.
Right. Altadena was where you went when you couldn't afford to live in Silver Lake anymore, right?
Yeah.
About 10, I don't know, 10 years or so ago, it was pretty affordable. I mean, look, I'm kind of a nut. This is not a secret. I actually have a book coming out in a few months where I talk about this. I tried to build a house in Los Angeles. I
Oh
spent about
gosh.
7 yes. I'm just a simple caveman essayist. And, as one does, I attempted to build a house.
Yeah.
And,
You're also a masochist, apparently.
yes, I am,
Yeah.
and, complete lunatic. But, yeah, I spent about 7 years trying to develop a property, a very simple, small, modest house in a neighborhood in Los Angeles, in a hilly area in the northeast, part of the city. And, part of the rationale there was that the cost of housing was terrible. I didn't wanna get into a bidding war, and I had this idea that if I just bought a piece of land and had a very simple plan, I could actually develop something, with an architect that would be, more affordable than trying to buy a house in a bidding war. And if I had gotten it done in the first 2 years, it probably would have worked. I spent, a couple of years fighting a neighbor, and then the zoning commission, and then COVID happened, and all bets were off. Just the price of
Mm.
construction and the supply chain made it unaffordable. So I got the project all the way to, where you could pull permits, and I had to unload it, and it was quite emotionally devastating. So that's when I moved to Altadena, and, I, yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, I was absolutely enchanted by Altadena when I got there. I thought it was a place I could potentially stay. Interestingly, the houses were more, expensive in Altadena than in certain parts of LA, partly because, they tend to be the ones that tend to go on the market tend to be a little bit bigger. I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but my point is that Altadena was not affordable either.
Yeah.
Um, and, this stuff is shifting all the time, and actually during COVID, you might wanna check this. I believe that during COVID, the housing prices of Altadena increased more than any place in the United States because you had so many people moving out, to sort of more sprawling areas. They wanted more space, they wanted to be in nature, they wanted to be in wildlife, they didn't have to commute downtown, they didn't have to commute to their jobs, and so Altadena is, like, the perfect place to move to during a
Yeah.
COVID-like
Um,
situation.
I mean, your story about trying to build in California, anyone who's ever tried to do
I've
it
lost
will
all
have
credibility with
something
anybody
similar.
listening to me right now.
I mean, we just, when I tried to convert a garage to an ADU, I mean, eventually we succeeded in that project, but it was, I mean, the absurdities that you go through. First, it's like you have to, I remember I had to renovate the garage, and then renovate the garage just meant kind of clean everything out and like take the drywall off, and then get them to come and be like, okay, this is now a renovated garage that can be like grandfathered into some ADU thing somehow. And then like a quarter of the way into the process, they're like, oh, the city commissioner or the city planners, the guy at the city planner's office is like, oh, it has to be this certain distance off the fence line,
Mhm.
even though this law had been passed to make an exemption. They're like, you didn't make it in this window, and then they essentially had to go to a different just a different bureaucrat in the
Yes.
valley to rubber
Yes.
stamp it. And like that's the
Exactly.
level of like what you have to. It's like
Who's
you're
probably an
approaching.
intern. Yes,
Yeah,
the
you're
urban planners
approaching
that they
like.
have left over are like, somebody who was working in the mailroom the week before.
Yes.
Yes.
You're approaching, developing world conditions where it's all about like who instead of any like discernible rule of law. But Gavin Newsom has said goodbye red tape. It's time to get rid of that red tape. He posted a tweet saying goodbye red tape through an executive order. We're making it easier for victims of the SoCal fires to quickly rebuild their homes and lives. And we're also extending key price gouging protections to help make rebuilding more
Mhm.
affordable. This is what what specifically he's targeting with his executive order is what's known as CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. That is kind of known as the bane of the developer's existence all throughout California. It's the basic environmental review that slows everything down and adds. It's like I'm just overriding that. Also,
Run.
any permits from the California Coastal Act, so that bypassing the California Coastal Commission, which for people who don't know, that is one of the most powerful agencies in California. And they seem to have an ideology that says, we don't want anything on the coast. And so we're going to make it impossible. And it was smart.
I mean,
It's
it
very,
makes sense. You
yeah,
understand why I
it's
would say
telling,
that?
yes, it's telling that Newsom is like, these are the two things that need to go if we're going to allow people to rebuild in Palisades. It also raises the question of why hasn't this ever been looked at before? Um, but then also, it's kind of like the perfect California thing. He's also like, well, we're going to add this price gouging thing in, which is potentially, I mean, from my guess would be that one of the possible results from that would be that these items that it applies to: food, cleanup supplies, building materials, housing and transport. A lot of times when you set a price ceiling on something like that, you get shortages, which you don't want in this kind of situation.
Mhm.
Um, do you have any insight on that? Do you know any in terms of like emergency supplies? Are people experiencing hardship getting supplies,
Oh,
fuel, or food, or anything like that?
um, I mean, it's such a big area, like, I think people would be shocked. I mean, these fires were raging, in certain parts of the region, but then, 12 miles away, people were jogging and sitting outside in cafes in the sun. So, no, I mean, certainly when I've been back into Pasadena, there are people handing out supplies, and there's lots of people are displaced. I mean, the power is not on in large swaths, and you really cannot people cannot get back in their homes, and they're still holed up in hotels and in shelters. So yeah, there's been tremendous effort to get supplies out, and you know baby supplies and pets. I mean, a lot of the large animal evacuation centers I know are full, and I believe there are efforts from other parts of the state to come and help with that. So there's all these elements. And I people have been incredibly supportive. I mean, the fact is that even though, I mean, I can't speak for anyone else. For some reason, I was not getting any emergency alerts on my phone. I mean, I get an emergency alert if an elderly person wanders out of their house. It's a silver alert.
Mhm.
And I get amber alerts, but for some reason I did not get a fire alert. But that's just me. I'm not saying that's everybody. But
Kind of.
for all of that dysfunction, the fact is that we have so many ways of communicating now. I mean, everybody's got a group chat. Everyone's got group texts, WhatsApps, Facebook groups, and everybody is communicating in all kinds of ways and coordinating. And it's really nice to see. I mean, we always say this about New York, that New Yorkers rally in times of crisis, and I think Angelenos get a really bad reputation that way. But it's not true. I mean, there's just been incredible kindness, and I think it does bring out the best in people. Unfortunately, there's looting, and people are taking advantage of the situation. I did see since we're talking about real estate, I did see the day after the fire, some tiny little, really rundown house in a not good neighborhood popped up on the market for just under $2 million. I mean, ridiculous. Something that
Well,
should have been listed for 700,000, that kind of thing. But I think that's going to get smacked down pretty quickly.
yeah.
It's just karmically inadvisable.
Well, let me ask you a little bit more about that because a big question people are asking is what's going to happen now to whether it's Altadena or the Palisades, and one of the measures that Newsom has announced he's implementing via executive order is to ban what he calls, lowball offers on the real estate, on
Mm.
land where it's been burned down. I think we actually have a clip of
Oh,
it. John, could you run that clip real quick? Because I want to talk about that.
I'm here in Altadena. I just signed an executive order with community leaders to deal with the issue that is becoming a bigger and bigger issue every day. And that's land developers that are engaging in predatory efforts to make unsolicited offers for properties at significantly below market value. This predatory behavior is disgusting in the best of times. And of course, here in the midst of this tragedy at scale, it's disgraceful. So we're going to hold those folks accountable. I'm very grateful for the leadership here in the community that promoted this approach. And this executive order is a reflection of their direction and their commitment to preserving the unique character of this community for generations to come.
What's your reaction to that?
well, I was actually going to ask you that as a libertarian. What's your reaction to that?
Um, Again, I worry that this is the toughest part of any sort of California renaissance, which I do want to see because, like you, as much as I'm a critic of Gavin Newsom or LA governance or California governance, like I loved living in LA in a lot of ways, and it's a great city. The Palisades are beautiful, but there I've heard this rhetoric the entire time I've lived there about greedy developers, and it's usually about, oh, they want to buy up these houses in this historic neighborhood and build
Yeah.
apartments, and change the character of the neighborhood. And in that case, what it is essentially a NIMBY defense force to prevent anything from ever change. It kind of artificially boosts, keeps like the housing supply low, and then as right at the moment when people are trying to move into a hot neighborhood, they're saying no, you can't build an apartment building for the 4-story apartment building, because it's just a giveaway to these greedy developers. So I'm immediately skeptical of that framing. But secondly, this is a different situation. Obviously, we're in the wake of a tragedy, and I understand that if your house just burned down, it's going to be quite annoying and insulting to be getting call after call offering a fraction of what your land was worth last week. I understand that that's a terrible thing. I guess the unintended consequence that I worry about here is that there's people that are going to need cash, and this is just going to be gumming up the market, and making it much harder to have a transparent, robust market at just the moment when a lot of people in desperate need might need it. So I
Yeah.
guess that's my immediate reaction to it.
No, I share that reaction. I mean, I can think of so many people in my neighborhood who I mean, the house has been in their family for generations. It's in disrepair. They don't have a lot of money, and now they have nowhere to go. They can't afford to wait around for years for a lawsuit to play out or for a settlement to come through or for FEMA to come through or for whatever it is. I mean, I can absolutely imagine somebody walks in and says, "Okay, I'll pay you a couple $100,000 for this, property that's worth 800,000 without a structure on it, mind you, 1,000,000." I can see people taking that and maybe they should.
Yeah.
I don't like it, like, as somebody who believe me, as somebody who spent a lot of time thinking about houses that I would like to live in and places I would like to live, I don't like it at all, but it's hardly fair to prevent people from doing what they need to do.
Yeah.
You know
The
you
little
know
bit of yeah. Well, I would just say the little bit of, I guess, caveat that I would put there is that, you know, I'm glad that the governor is suspending CEQA and letting people bypass the Coastal
Yes,
Commission in the Palisades.
yes, yes,
The people in Altadena, the Coastal Commission is not relevant to them, but I would like, you know, if you want to give people maximize their opportunity to rebuild after this, that is the direction. Like, saying I'm going to cut red tape is one thing. How far you can go in cutting that red tape to make it possible for people to make a real decision and not a
yes,
decision under the
yes,
duress of, well, I have to take this lowball offer from a developer because they might have the capital and the political will to actually do something with this land. I'm not going to be able to fight the city
exactly,
and the state to rebuild anything. That is the problem here. And I think that is probably why people have this visceral part of why people have this really visceral reaction to these big companies coming in and buying up the land after this, because they feel there's a fundamental unfairness. And I think
totally.
there's truth to that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, the other thing is people are gonna have to start thinking about how to live in this environment. I mean, goes back to the climate change conversation. Yes, climate change is happening, but the reason for the destruction is not necessarily the climate change in and of itself, but the fact that we have built in places where we shouldn't be building. And if we're determined to live in those places, we need to figure out what materials to use so this doesn't happen. I mean, I think it's gonna be really interesting to see sort of what burned down and what didn't, and and how we can go forward because a house my house was probably 100 years old. It was a very small little kind of wooden bungalow, absolute tinderbox in retrospect, and, you just can't have that kind of thing in 2025 in the state of
Mhm.
California. It makes absolutely no sense. So I think we're gonna
Yeah.
have to massively just reconfigure the way we think about where we live, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, again, part of that is, what are the priorities when you're talking about environmental policy and specifically people being able to create resilient situations for themselves living in these environments. If there are regulations that are making it harder to build new construction that might be more resilient, then that's not having a good effect
Right.
on the situation if you're trying to take climate change seriously.
Yes.
Even, Nolan Gray had a very interesting article about this. He writes about housing policy and the way that could possibly be pushing people to live in more vulnerable zones. If you're in a urban area a dense urban area like LA that has its own challenges, but you are nested within a lot of infrastructure. Whereas, I don't think this affects people in the Palisades directly necessarily because those are wealthy people who just want to live on a cliff overlooking the ocean. But people living in parts of Altadena or out in the Antelope Valley, like a lot of people there's a lot of people living in these very, I think of the Antelope Valley, some pretty extreme areas cut off from infrastructure that maybe would rather live closer to the city, but
Oh,
they
yeah.
just can't
They've
afford
been pushed
to do
out
so.
there.
Yeah, they've
Yeah.
been pushed out. So these are all hopefully things that if this kind of rethink that you suggest might be happening in Southern California happens, that will be taken under consideration. I guess I wanted to close this by asking you a little bit more about where you think it might be headed. If there has been this mindset shift that was already in motion before these fires hits, and these fires just kind of put a, you know, exclamation mark on it or something, then, like, we've got the Karen Bass situation. We've talked about Newsom. We've got the discontent with Karen Bass, who went on a vacation and may or may not have, that may have been a bad judgment call. There were apparently some indications ahead of time that these winds were going to be a risk. Aside from that, just some of the management of the infrastructure. One of the big things is the state is investigating why this reservoir up in the Palisades
Yeah.
was offline and empty, which may have helped with that whole fire hydrants are out of water situation somewhat. Just to be clear, by the way, this picture the LA Times used is not a current picture, but it's just to convey that, you know, there's a big reservoir there and it was non-functional.
And
Um,
apparently would have only cost $130,000 to fill, according to what I read. I don't know if that's accurate, but
right, right. Yeah, there was some sort of problem with the cover on it that had
yes,
caused
get your
the
pool
water
cover.
to be
So you don't
contaminated. Yes,
wanna
yeah,
you
just
gotta
need a replacement pool cover.
unsafe. You don't want
Uh,
your dog to step onto it. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, but
Yes.
I guess what do you see? Where do you see this going? What maybe let me put it maybe a slightly different way. Where do you hope this goes? What sort of course correction are you hoping for California in the
Yeah.
coming years?
I mean, it's the course correction that I've been hoping for the whole country, which is that I want people to be imaginative. I don't want them to be despondent. I don't want them to be deranged. I don't want them to be so polarized that it's like all Trump's fault, it's all MAGA, or it's all the woke, libtard, lesbian fire chief's fault. Like, none of that's true. You really grow up. Like, I want people to grow up, and I want them to think seriously. And, my big thing, my brand is nuance. Nuanced AF is what my podcast merch says, which I had boxes of in my house that have now burned down. But podcast merch is replaceable. I want people to think critically about what needs to be done, and really move forward. I mean, I find what's happening, in certain corners of the new political right really interesting. I think there are new generations of people coming up that have ideas that are not so rooted in polarization, and we need to be open to them. I think people need to actually speak up. Like, if you have a friend who's saying, "Oh my God, this is all about climate change, and this is terrible, and Trump is terrible, and Newsom's great," you'd say, "Well, you know what? It's a lot more complicated than that. Like, let's
Mm,
actually think about this," because I think most people do want to embrace the gray areas, but they're afraid to say something because their Facebook feed is just filled with people waving their hands around and batting anybody down who calls for any kind of complexity. And so that's what has to stop. Like, we're all grown-ups here. We're not run by toddlers.
yeah. Uh,
Rise to the occasion.
And you feel like there is a growing appetite or community for that in
I think
Southern
so.
California? Because I'll be honest, like when I was there, it did not feel very much like that outside of the very small bubble. But yeah, tell me a little bit more about.
Well, look, I mean,
Obviously.
I over-index for people who wanna think about these things. I mean, my podcast is all about this. I created, this community called the Unspeakeasy, which is all about coming together and talking about complex issues honestly, in real life. So I may be a little overly optimistic, but look, I can't tell you how many people I know in California and elsewhere, but in California, who said, I voted for Kamala Harris, but I didn't want her to win. I didn't want Trump to win either, but I'm secretly relieved that she didn't win. And that really tells you something.
It does.
Um, Most of the people in my community that I built the Unspeakeasy, we took a poll internally, and it was slightly more for Harris, but everybody they were for neither candidate. Okay. Like,
Mhm,
most
yes.
people are not as dug in as they appear to be. A lot of it is it's kind of tribal self-protection. They don't want to alienate their friends, so they say what they think is expected. But it doesn't really reflect what most people want. And so I think we
Yeah.
just need to start being honest about the way forward. And I mean, I think there's opportunity here, and not in an, cynical opportunist kind of way. I am really interested to see how this plays out. It's going to be tremendously painful, but I think we could come out on the other side with something great. It might not even be in my lifetime. It probably won't be, but I'm gonna try to be as hopeful as possible amid all of this.
I have to admit, I'm fascinated by the idea of a person who votes for Kamala Harris while crossing their fingers behind their back, hoping that she doesn't actually win. I don't know
Can't
if
tell you how many
realize
people
you're allowed to not vote for anybody.
That's true.
Yeah.
But if you can say I voted for her with a
Yeah.
straight face, and you're not lying. So
Yes.
there you go.
Keep that cognitive dissonance at a minimum, perhaps. Let me ask you the final question of the show, which is something we ask all of our guests. What is the question that you think that more people should be asking?
Oh. Oh, wow. Um, God, that's a great question. I wish I had. I mean, I guess the question is, um, what with any given subject, I think it should be, what are the unintended consequences? We assume that we're on the right side of this,
Yeah,
but let's be able to think about the unintended consequences and admit to them. And admit that this has happened. Like the DEI thing, I want to be really careful about that, because it's very easy to just chomp on that like red meat all day.
for
If
sure.
there is discussion to be had about that, let's do that in a respectful and reasonable and honest way. But it's never any one thing. I always say this, like there's never two sides to any there's not two sides to any story. There's a million sides to every story. So just try to ask yourself where your biases are. I mean, it's really easy to get upset about this.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's extremely upsetting, but maybe just use it as an opportunity to think of what could come out of it, rather than what will be painful in the short term.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. Before we go, where can people best find your work?
Yeah, I like many of us, I've got too many websites floating around. So the best thing to do is go to theunspeakablepodcast.com. That is my Substack, where you can find my podcast. I'm gonna do, in addition to my regular episodes, I'm gonna do little audio dispatches regularly about the situation here.
Great.
I also have writing there. And they can the best thing, people say, how can I help you? They can become paying subscriber. That's really the best thing. And if anybody, there's also the unspeakeasy.com. That's where you can find out about our free speech vacation retreats, my women's shelter for the politically homeless, as I call it. So that's the unspeakeasy.com and the unspeakablepodcast.com.
Well, Meghan, thank you. I'll be reading that, especially looking for the updates on the ground situation. I really appreciate the perspective you bring to this, and the nuance that you seek and communicate. So thank you for joining us on the show today.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Zach.
Thanks for listening to Just Asking Questions. We drop a new episode every Thursday, so if you want to support the work we do, please like and share this episode, subscribe to our new YouTube channel, and follow the show on your favorite podcasting app. See you next time.